We started the Mishnah yesterday. Should we just do that Mishnah again? Just start with the Rashis. And then we'll go on into the Gemora of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so whenever you're ready, then I guess we could turn the camera on.
Basically trying to say that with a corridor that has both sides, you might think this side was an outside Shabbat that was the last point discussed before commercial lot, so what it is not.
Right.
And if it has a small side, it's mitzvah, and a big side, it's...
No, we said if it has two sides, basically you can only use the side that's mutter for you, not the other side. But it doesn't make it worse to have the other side. That's if you put both of the Lashonos together, both of the versions together agree basically from a slightly different vantage point. Even if you have an implement with two sides, you can always use the side that's what we call the kofit side, the Zachru side.
Yeah.
So it's basically taking the Mishnah and just, as the Gemora said, it's really just saying what the Mishnah said, but it's saying it in a case where you might have thought otherwise. So there's a chiddush in what Rav Hina bar Shila said. Okay, now we started a new Mishnah yesterday,
Right.
so perhaps we'll review that one as well.
So the Mishnah
Want to start
says-
the camera?
Yeah.
There we go.
Thank you.
So the Mishnah reads,
So here we are in Tsama Nafshi, Monday afternoon. Together with my favorite Talmidim in learning Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis in Maseches Beitsa. In the middle of the Amud, there's a new Mishnah, Bais Shehu Malei Peros, a house full of fruit. Which, by the way, fruit can probably mean any food substance. It doesn't mean necessarily tangerines. It could be even wheat or any other food substance that, for the Kiddush of the Mishnah to work, it would still be true. Okay, so let's read the Mishnah and then the Rashi on the Mishnah, and then we'll try the Gemora. You want to try the Mishnah, Shabbatai?
Beis Shehu Malei Perot, a house for a room which is full of fruit, a nifchat yotel, which is broken, which has got a hole in it. You said in the roof yesterday. We can take fruit from. Mimakom ha-fechat, from its place of brokenness.
Right, from a little opening. Basically, the roof or whatever opens up a touch for some reason. Doesn't say how it happened. Then, now that you have access to that fruit, you can take the fruit.
Right. So, Rav Ma'ir Omer, Pochat Lach Techila Veneto. So he said, even if it's broken...
No, it's a verb.
Even if you break it...
Not if. It doesn't say if. And like, he also really, off is really also, not really, the word afilo means even, but off means also. So the Tana Kama just talked about when it happened by itself, that part of the building developed a hole of some sort and you were able to access the fruit. But you didn't make that happen, it happened by itself. That's the Tana Kama's position. Rabbi Meir says you're actually allowed to be pochet. Af pochet, also a person, is a verb, so it's going on a person doing it. A person can be pochet, like is allowed to diminish the building, take part of the building away, as it were.
What is niflachas loito?
Going back into the earlier
Yeah.
sentence. Which part?
Nifachas.
Nifchat.
Yeah.
The word nifchat.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, the nun makes it passive, correct?
Yeah.
Like many verbs, like the word nilmad means something that was learned. And the word and the verb here that is a passive verb is the word pachot. What's pachot?
Less.
Right. So if you look at it as a verb, it became lessened. It became diminished, as it were.
Became.
Now, if you have a structure that becomes diminished, it doesn't mean it's shrunk down to the size of a dollhouse. That's not that kind of diminishing that we're talking about. We don't believe in that kind of magic where you can take a house and just diminish it down to a dollhouse size. That's not the diminishing we're talking about. The diminishing we're talking about is, as Shabbatai had translated, that it somehow developed a hole in the side or in the roof. That's what it became diminished. Right? So if you have a structure that develops a hole, in a sense it became diminished. The structure is diminished. So that becomes a verb for, to some extent or other, partially caving in or partially crumbling, as it were. You have a structure that becomes diminished in the sense that I had a full wall, now I only have a partial wall. Or I had a full roof, now I have a partial roof. To that extent, it became diminished. Okay, so if you feel better with a different verb, you can replace it with another verb, right?
The mesh became weakened.
It's not weak. It's think of like this room was full of fruit, okay, but you were on the outside, you couldn't reach it, and all of a sudden something happened to the wall, and now you could reach it. What could happen to help you reach the wall?
Cave in.
Partially caved in, or partially broke, or partially was destroyed. Right? In the olden days, when you had weaker houses, it could happen. The wind could all of a sudden blow off a few tiles of the roof, maybe, or something, right? The Gemora in Sukkos, I don't know if you ever learned Sukkos, it's a Mishnah really. The same thing in the Gemora in Sukkos. In the Mishnah in Sukkos, it says, Abai shenifchas, exact same verb used in a Mishnah over there in Sukkos. What's the Mishnah trying to talk about? That I'm in my house, the roof kind of caved in. And then I decided to use it as my sukkah. Now that there's no roof, might as well just lay some schach across and I won't have to build a sukkah this year, right? Very convenient. So the Mishnah there talks about, is that okay? What are the details of that? But that's the kind of case that we're talking about, where you have a complete structure of a house, and partially it crumbles, partially it caves in, partially it, whatever verb you want to use, the structure that was there now developed a hole, as it were. So now, as far as it was full of fruit and you couldn't get at it, and now you can get at it, that's what allows you to get at it. The hole that was created now allows you to access this fruit. That before Yom Tov you weren't really able to access it. Okay?
Yeah.
So, that was the Tanna Kama's position, that even though Erev Yom Tov, it was a house full of fruit that you couldn't access, so what would we normally say about fruit that you can't access? Should have been muksa, right? That's what Rosh is going to talk about. Why isn't it? Because we've had cases before where we had, for example, a case of wood that he pushed off to like some kind of, what do we call it? The muksa. The muksa in the back of storage area where I'm not even going to think about getting it for a long time. And we said also that could become muksa, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So this should have been muksa, something that was sort of off limits, out of bounds, something you can't really access, and all of a sudden you can access it, but it's almost like an accident. So maybe it should still be muksa. That's the question. Why? And yet the Tanna Kama says you are allowed to use that fruit.
Is that b'diavad? It's b'diavad, in this sense.
Well, which part is b'diavad? The muksa aspect or the house crumbling aspect?
The house crumbling.
It's b'diavad meaning you prefer to have a house. not crumbling.
No,
Which part is b'diavad?
If it's got a hole in it, it just happened, and you took the fruit. It just happened.
Okay, but that's more than b'diavad. That's like, yeah, you're right. It's like a b'diavad type of thing, but it's worse. It's like more extreme than b'diavad. B'diavad is like, I didn't mean to do it, but now it happened. Okay, here I didn't even mean to do it. I didn't even do it really. It's, probably some wind blew and some of the boards fell off or something. You know, somehow or other it happened on its own. Right, and he doesn't really talk about what if someone just didn't know the halacha and he took apart the house and to get at the fruit. That doesn't say. Maybe it would be also true that if you didn't know the halacha and you went ahead and did it because of ignorance, and then someone told you, no, you really shouldn't have done that. You know, it's also to take apart a building on Yom Tov, but okay, now that you did it, basically, yes, it would be a case. So that's the difference between a Tana Kama and Rebbe Meir, right? The Rebbe Meir's Mechadish, which obviously, you know, both of them are a Chiddush, but the Rebbe Meir is a bigger Chiddush, that not only if it happened by itself or through some accident, as it were, but even Lechatchila, you're allowed to do that act of diminishing the house, somehow opening up a wall, opening up the roof. For whatever reason, he says that's not a problem on Yom Tov. I guess to some extent, not really the same thing, but to some extent it's like opening up a package of food. Food is inside this package, and I'm allowed to open the package in order to access the food. Everybody knows you can do that on Shabbos or Yom Tov, but the truth is, it's not always really so simple. Let's say on Shabbos, if you have a bag of milk, they say you should try to make the smallest tiny opening to get the milk out if you have to, and not a proper opening, because a proper opening is a petach. And a petach is really, it's like building. If you create a petach, you're creating a kind of a building. So, halachically, you're not really allowed to do that. So you have to be very careful to make the tiniest of holes. It's not really a proper petach. So there are halachas even opening up packages of food, where you're saying, oh, do it in a way that doesn't create, or, you know, to some extent do a malacha to open up that package. Of course, if there are letters, you try to avoid breaking letters and so forth. But there are even other halachas. If it's glued together, you can't really undo the glue part, because it's, in a sense, you're taking apart something that was glued together, which you're not really allowed to do either. So on Shabbos, there are even halachas, even about opening up packages of food. To some extent or other, this would almost seem to go into that category. The whole house is a kind of a package surrounding the food that's inside. Some kind of a strange situation where the house became full of fruit. If you talk about it as being a house like a house you and I would live in, that's even more bizarre, but it might just mean a simple case of like a barn. They loaded up the barn with even grain. Might be a certain more normal scenario of a house full of fruit. And then they loaded it up so much, and then they didn't want anyone having access to it, so they basically somehow closed out all the doors, closed everything, so it's like an enclosed package. So maybe Rebbe Meir holds that just like you're allowed to do other malachas to access food, maybe he feels this also is like just a case of opening up a package of food somehow. Alright, I'm just conjecturing.
Okay.
So we have the Tana Kama's main chiddush is what?
You're allowed to take it from the place.
Wherever that hole that was created, which was like accidentally created somehow, you're allowed to reach into that hole and take out the fruit that you might have thought was muksa.
Yeah.
And the chiddush of the Tana Kama is it's not muksa for some reason, right? That Rosh will have to deal with, and perhaps the Gemora as well. Okay, and Rebbe Meir's chiddush. What is Rebbe Meir's chiddush?
Even from where it became broken,
No, you said became broken. That's nifcha. That was the Tana Kama's lashon. He's using a different lashon. He's using the word pochet, which is the active verb.
He broke.
In its present tense. A man does this. Present tense means it's done.
Oh,
This is done. This is done. A man is what?
Breaking.
He breaks open the house. He breaks open a hole.
No,
No, lichatchila. Those are called chet.
yeah.
He can even do that lichatchila. He doesn't have to wait for it to happen on its own through some accident or act of nature or something, like the wind blew a tile off. He can go ahead and do it lichatchila.
Yeah.
He can be pochet lichatchila. He can take away part of the building to create a hole, to create access to the food, even lichatchila. And then no-tell. I mean, I don't think that's such a chiddush, because even the Tanakama said no-tell, right? But maybe the chiddush is that, we said before, nifchat could mean it happened on its own. But what if you do it and you did an isser? Will we let you gain from that isser? What's the halacha? If you do a malacha on Shabbos, can you gain from that malacha? What do you say, Ceruli? If you do, right? Person does a malacha on Shabbos. Let's say he forgot, he cooked some food. Are you allowed to eat it on Shabbos?
I think yes.
No, you're not allowed. We're not allowed to get benefit from a malacha on Shabbos. Right? Now there's a question if you did it a shogeg, and if other people could get benefit. There is a sheet, I think Rabbi Meir himself holds that if somebody b'shogeg did a malacha on Shabbos, then others can get benefit from it on Shabbos, but he himself not.
What about after Shabbos?
After Shabbos, you have to wait for the amount of time it would take to do that malacha. But there are three opinions in the Gemora on Shabbos. There's Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, I think Rabbi Yochanan Asandler, of all people. But anyhow, okay, so I remember apparently in the army there was this shaila came up, I heard many years ago, from soldiers being in a place where there were fry soldiers cooking food on Shabbos. Could he eat that food? It was done in a kosher kitchen, but in the end of the day it was a malacha. So Rav Eliashiv said, you can rely on Rabbi Meir b'shasa dechak, like in an emergency, which means there's no other food available, only the food was cooked on Shabbos, so then you can rely on Rabbi Meir, which means since they're considered shogeg, which was one chiddush of Rav Eliashiv, that the people who did cook it, even if they knew it was Shabbos, it's still called shogeg, because they're like tinuk shenishba or whatever. And the other people, even the from people, can get benefit from it, but only according to Rabbi Meir, because it's called shasa dechak.
What does the chatchila called to the way?
You're taking apart a house, right?
Yeah.
Now, do you think that that's a good thing to do on Yom Tov, to take houses apart?
No.
Now, you bring me a proof that it's usher to take a house apart on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. Remember we had a few pages ago? Soiser, right? We had a whole thing about soiser with case of the wood.
Yes.
Right? The wood, and it was a sukkah, but it wasn't really what we call a sukkah. It was just a structure on a regular Pesach or whatever. And the question was if it's the schach part, if it's the walls or whatever, but the Gemara made it clear. We're not just allowed to take apart houses on Yom Tov. Right? So Rabbi Meir is saying a chiddush. You are allowed to take this house apart. For whatever reason. Right? We don't know what the heter of Rabbi Meir is, but he's saying, I allow you to do it lichatchila. Right? Maybe because there's food involved. And we know you're allowed to do malacha for food.
But the taking the wood from the sukkah is also...
What food was involved there?
Cooking food.
That's a few steps removed.
Right.
Here it's directly, I need to take this to get at my food. My food is right there. I have to do this to get to the food. Maybe that's much more direct. Whereas cooking is like I take this and then I cook and then I this and I get to food 2-3 steps later. Not directly for the food. This might be more directly for the food.
What's that called? Yeah.
What?
Where you remove steps removed?
That idea was called a hechsher. What do you call it? Hechsher ochel nefesh. Machshirei ochel nefesh. You're preparing something, but there, the cases of the Gemora were always where an implement was being made for the sake of cooking. Let's say I'm making something for the sake of cooking, or I'm sharpening a knife for the sake of cooking. But I'm saying it's the same idea in principle, that if you're taking wood to make a fire, to get to the food, that's still too many steps removed. It's still more like Makshirei Ochel Nefesh, in my opinion. So it could be that's why we were more Machmir, or at least Rebbe Meir was. And over here, maybe it's not necessarily everyone agrees. The Tanna Kama doesn't necessarily agree with Rebbe Meir. But Rebbe Meir's Chiddush might be based on that idea. That,
Also the Sukkah is Kadosh, right?
what?
The Sukkah is
Oh,
Kadosh.
no, only one case. We said that most of the cases there were dealing with what we call a sukkah, but it's really not. It's just a structure that was on Pesach or on Shavuos.
A gazebo, so to
Hmm?
say. A gazebo.
Like a gazebo.
Right.
They called it a sukkah just to give us the idea of like a temporary structure out, not necessarily a house. In any event, here it actually calls it a house. That sounds like a much more permanent structure. But maybe we'll have to say it's a special kind of a house. It's a temporary structure. Maybe that's part of the heter, that nobody expects it to survive the storm, and therefore you can go ahead and open it up yourself. You don't have just to wait for the wind to blow it away. Well, we have to see. But see, in my opinion, that was part of the chiddushes that Rebbe Meir doesn't just say you can open it up yourself. He says v'notel, and then take the food. It could be he mentions that because that's part of his heter. Right? We already said notel. The Tanna Kama said notel. So Rebbe Meir's chiddush is not really in that. They're both agreeing on that. So why mention notel? If really that was already covered by the Tanna Kama, you're not saying anything new. The answer is no. He had to say notel perhaps because that's part of his whole shita. Is that in order for you to be notel, you had to take away. So I let you take away the let's say the wall, part of the wall, and take the food that you need. So the notel might be part of his heter, so that's maybe why he's mentioning it. Okay.
Yeah. So
Anyhow, it's all conjecture. I'm just trying to open up the neural pathways, as it were.
So where's more machmir at?
Rebbe Meir,
Yeah.
do you see him being more machmir here or more mekel?
Maker, brothers more machmir.
That seems to be true. Yes, it does seem to be true. The Tanna Kama is being mekel in Hilchas Muksa, I would say. When you would have thought to be machmir, he's saying no, you can be mekel, but he's not being mekel in Hilchas, let's say, stiras ohel. But the Rebbe Meir says that you can even be mekel in that. Okay, let's see the Rashi, truly.
Nifachas.
Nifchas.
Allah means for itself.
By itself.
By itself.
Right? In other words, it happened by itself. According to Tanna Kama, the cases where somehow or other the roof caved in or whatever by itself. No one had to lift a finger for that to happen. Right?
What's that, right?
May a love.
May.
By itself. Okay, next Rashi. Notel.
Notel mamakolam ham
Hapechas.
take from the place
Where it caved in.
Caved in. V'lo aminim muktzin. Achmas Israel. Don't say that these are also because of muktzah.
What's these? What's the these?
The fruit.
The fruit. We don't say the fruit is muksa because of Isser. What would be the Isser? What's the Isser? What's the Isser that we don't say it's muksa Isser? Well, what would it be the Isser?
Muktzah.
No, the Isser is the malacha.
Listen.
The only way you get at this food is by doing stira. By destroying the roof, right? This time it happened by itself, but the only normal way of getting at that fruit was for you to do an Isser. So that's sometimes called muksa machmas Isser. This thing is muksa because the only way you can use it is through an Isser.
Mm-hmm.
The only way I can get at this fruit is by doing an Isser. So Rashi says, don't say that for some reason.
Ein yachal lefchosoi.
Lefachso.
Lefachsoi b'yom tov.
Because really, the Tanna Kama at least holds what? You're not able to what? To diminish the meaning and make a hole in that structure on Yom Tov, right? You're not allowed. You're not allowed to just make a hole in the wall or make a hole in the roof.
Sorry, can you explain the muktzah machak?
Muksa machmas isser means if the only way I can use this object is through an isser being done,
Yeah.
then it's obviously off bounds.
And the
Right?
Isser is Muksa or the Isser is breaking the building?
Breaking the building.
Uh-huh.
If I have an object that the only way of getting to the object or utilizing the objects is by doing an isser, that should have been called muksa machmas isser.
So,
Right? What's the idea of muksa? Something is off bounds. It's
Right.
pushed away from me.
uh-huh.
Well, this is being pushed away from me. Why? Because there's an isser to get to that fruit.
I see.
What's the isser? Taking apart a building. So we should have called it muksa machmas isser. This should have been a classic case of muksa machmas isser. I have fruit, but the only way I can get to that fruit is by doing an isser. So I should have considered it muksa, off bounds,
Machmas Isser.
because of the fact that the only way I can get to it is through an isser of destroying the house. So it should have been machmas isser, muksa machmas isser. Rosh, this Tanakama is machadish that it's not. In this case, we don't consider it to be why.
אין יכול לחסר ביותר.
That's why it should have been muksa machmas isser, because you can't get to it. You can't diminish the house to get to it on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to actually lift up the boards.
Yeah.
And therefore, normally we would have said what? It's inside of a house. The only way to get to it is by destroying part of the wall. I can't do that on Yom Tov. So therefore, normally we would have said,
Yep.
Asach
Asach starts
minayhu. We should have said he's made his mind detached from it, right? Or he's not thinking about these fruits anymore, right? When Yom Tov comes in, is he thinking about getting to these fruits? Is he dreaming about getting to the avocados that are behind the wall of this house?
No.
No, because he knows the only way to get to it is by destroying the house, which is usher. So he should have just forget about the fruit till after Yom Tov. Forget about it. Forgetting about it is la siach das. La siach das means to sort of detach one's mind from something, right? To stop paying attention to something. We use the same lashon in terms of hilchos brachos, right? When you're eating something and then you suddenly start doing something else and you forgot completely that you were eating this food, often we say you had hesach hadas, you weren't thinking about the food anymore, you have to make a new bracha. Right? So this is an idea of when you stop paying attention to something. So in terms of muksa, we know that's the key to muksa. The key to muksa is, was your mind still connected to this object? Or for whatever reason, your mind has detached itself from this object. Any object which your mind has detached itself from this object, for at least Yom Tov or Shabbos, it should have been called muksa. So here I have a classic case, fruit behind the wall. I can't get to it because it would take an isser to get to it. So my mind kind of forgets about it. I say, look, for the next 24 hours, I'm not going to be able to get to these avocados because the only way to get to it is by doing an isser. And I don't want to do an isser on Yom Tov. So therefore, I'm just not really connected to these avocados anymore for the next 24 hours. That should have been the scenario. That should have produced Class A, Grade A muksa. But for some reason, the Tanakama does not hold that. But Rosh is saying, what is it he doesn't hold? He doesn't hold the normal scenario, which would have been expected, that because he can't get to it due to an isser, he's forgotten about the object, and basically, like we've talked about muksa in the past, he sort of pushed it away from himself mentally. That's called being masiach das. His mind has detached itself from this object. So we should have said that even if now the roof blows off, the wind blows off a few tiles from the roof, I can't just crawl up there and take some avocados. Because these avocados should have been muksa. Because I should have said at the beginning of Yom Tov, I'll never get to these avocados, therefore I'm forgetting about them for the next 24 hours. They should have therefore been muksa, and they should have, even if the wind does blow off a few tiles from the roof, I shouldn't be allowed. But Rashi says a chiddush here. Why does the Tanakama say you're allowed to use the fruit if the wind blows off the roof by mistake?
Okay.
Dekivan.
Since the Yom Tov for us,
Dekivan.
have a pachisoi. Asur Doraisa.
Okay, stop there. What's he saying?
That says that when we're breached,
Lo have bechisa so. Right? The opening of this window of the wall or whatever is not an Isura Doraisa.
yes.
Okay, now Rashi is saying a Chiddush, but Rashi is going to back it up. That we're talking about some kind of a house where if I would open up that roof or I would open up that wall, somehow or other that would not be called an Isser Doraisa. So since the opening up of that wall or opening up of the roof does not involve a real Isser Doraisa,
Aren't we usually allowed to destroy to build?
excuse me?
We're only allowed to destroy a building to rebuild, do something in its place.
On Shabbos it for sure is Asr. It should be Asr also on Yom Tov. That's the actual name of the Malacha, by the way. If you look in the Daf Ayin Gimel in Shabbos, where it lists all the 39 Malachas,
Yeah.
that's the name of the Malacha, to be Soiser Almanas Livnos. The only time you're really chayiv for taking apart a building is if your mind is that you want to. The truth is, if you just take apart something, take apart a building, right? You destroy a building. That's not necessarily a malacha d'oraisa, because you have to have in mind to rebuild it for it to be a constructive act. There's a few malachas that are inherently destructive. Erasing a letter, tearing a garment, taking apart a building. That we say, really, technically, it's not a malacha unless you had intention to do something constructive with that act. So, for example, if you erase a letter, but you have no intention to rewrite that letter, then you're not really chayav d'oraisa. It might still be asur d'rabanan, but it's not an isur d'oraisa. In order for it to be asur d'oraisa, it has to be your kavanah in erasing it was in order to write another letter in its place. Then the erasing is constructive as well. So, the same thing for ripping a garment. It has to be you ripped it in order to sew it back up in a better way. There's people who are involved in sewing, they know there are sometimes when you have to rip part of a garment and sew it up properly. And the same thing with like people who tear down a house in order to build another house, a better house underneath it, in its place. That's the classic act of the malacha of stira. Is that you have to do, and that's actually, if you look up the Mishnah in Shabbos, which lists all the 39 malachas, it actually says that. Soiser almanas livnos b'makoma. In fact, there's an interesting Gemora that says, well, we learn out from the Yidden, right, in the desert. When they took apart the Mishkan, that was an act of taking apart a building. But we say it's only going to be chayiv if you want to build it in the same place. You want to build somewhere else, it's pater. So every time the Yidden took apart the Mishkan, they always built it somewhere else. So the actual source of the malacha is actually the opposite. It's telling you they did it in order to build it somewhere else, but we're saying it's only chayiv if you want to build in the same place. How can that be? How can we learn from them, but they didn't do that? They didn't build in the same place, right? They built somewhere else always.
But this was during Chol, it wasn't.
Yeah, but that's the point. We learn from them all the malachas. Whatever went into building the... Hashem tells Moshe, go down the mountain, tell them about Shabbos, tell them about the Mishkan, but first tell them about Shabbos, so we're not allowed to do the Mishkan on Shabbos. So then we learn that whatever goes into making a Mishkan, that's what's usher on Shabbos. What goes into the Mishkan? Well, from time to time you take it apart and you move somewhere else. So that's called taking apart a building. That's where we learned that one of the malachas is taking apart a building. But the kasha of the Gemora is, if you're only chayiv when you rebuild it in the same place, like a person who tears down a building and just rebuilds a building in that same place, that's actual malacha d'oraisa. But if that's the real way that you have to be doing that malacha to be chayiv d'oraisa, then how could we be learning from the Jews in the desert? They didn't do that. Whenever they took apart the Mishkan, it was always to build it somewhere else. So the Gemora says a chiddush that no, since every time they took apart whatever they did, it was always al pi Hashem. It says always says in the Chumash, al pi Hashem yachnu, al pi Hashem yiso. Everything was al pi Hashem. So he said, since everything was al pi Hashem, every time they took it apart and rebuilt it, was always al pi Hashem. It's like they did it in the same place. It was always al pi Hashem. That's the chiddush of the Gemara. That's still called in the same place because you're not doing it somewhere else per se. You're just doing it wherever Hashem said, and then it's always al pi Hashem. So therefore, it's considered in the same place. Anyhow, so that is what's chayiv, right? But it actually is not chayiv if you're just doing a destructive act. You're just destroying a building, or you're just erasing a letter, or you're just tearing a garment, with no intention to do anything constructive with that, then it's actually patur. So maybe that's why over here, if he actually tears down the wall, if he has no intention to rebuild that spot, wherever he opened up this little opening, maybe he has no intention to rebuild it. So then maybe that's why it's not chayiv d'oraisa. But all the Rashi said so far is that since to access that fruit that's behind that wall, for me to take apart that wall would not be an issur d'oraisa, that's why it's not muksa. That's what Rashi seems to be saying. Now, why not? Rashi says, Kidamukminan la.
Kidamukminan la ba'avira.
Avira delivni.
Explain later on in the air of Levi.
And meaning later on the Gemora will make an ukimta, which means it establishes that our house is not a normal house, it's a special house. It's a house that has what's called avira delivni. Avira delivni might mean, we have to see when we get to the Gemora, livni are bricks, and avira is the air. So it could mean there's air between the bricks, and therefore taking it apart isn't a malacha d'oraisa.
In other words, they're not cemented, or
maybe they're not cemented, something like that, right? So Rashi says it's not a malacha d'oraisa. Yeah. So therefore, Rashi now said an interesting thing. Maybe it's asur d'Rabbanan, but Rashi said since midoraisa you could really take this wall apart anyways. And maybe that's why Rabbi Meir says you're allowed to do it, right? He actually says you're allowed to do it. But the Tanakama is saying you shouldn't really do it, right? Only if it happens by itself. But since if you did actually do it, it wouldn't be a deraisa. Therefore, lav muksa ninhu. Ninu means they are, so lav muksa ninu means they are not muksa. Right, so Rashi just went around about way of explaining why these fruits are not muksa. They're inside of a house, that the only way to get into that house to get the fruit is to somehow break down part of the wall or the roof or whatever, which is asur. But Rashi now is machadish. But since the act of opening up that wall or it's a special kind of a house where it wouldn't be a malacha d'oraisa to open up the wall or open up the house, therefore it's not called muksa.
But you'd only break open in the house to get to the fruit if it was on your mind.
Excuse me?
You had the fruit on your mind all the time, otherwise you wouldn't make a hole in the wall to get to it.
He didn't make a hole. Rabbi Meir talks about him making a hole. This happened by itself. Tanakama says that Rashi said me'ela, nifchas me'ela. This roof or wall or whatever caved in or somehow was diminished and it created a hole that you could access the fruit by itself. It happened by itself.
It's your mind's on it, right?
That's the chiddush that Rashi's trying to say, that since you know that if I really, really wanted that fruit, the only problem of getting to it would be, let's call it a malacha d'Rabbanan. Okay, even though Rashi didn't yet call it a malacha d'Rabbanan, but he did say it's not d'oraisa. So I'm surmising that it's still asur midrabbanan because the Tanakama doesn't let you do it and Rabbi Meir says you can do it. So according to the Tanakama, Rashi is saying it's not a malacha deraisa to break down that wall because of it's a vira delivni, whatever that means, some kind of a special wall, but it's still asur midrabanan to open up that wall.
So we get it straight, maybe the fruit is growing inside it.
It may not growing, maybe he stored it, maybe it's like a granary, some kind of a storage house that it somehow got locked up or something, that you can't really access it until something happens, and part of the wall is taken away or part of the roof is taken away. It's all inside that structure. Some kind of a structure that's containing fruit, and the only real way to get to it is through the opening up of something, which includes the wall or the roof or something. So the Mishnah is saying if that happened by itself, maybe somebody else came along and did it by mistake, or the wind blew it off, or whatever, you're allowed to take the fruit out from that house, even though if you would have asked a rabbi, am I allowed to take apart that wall to get to that fruit, except for Rabbi Meir, who later in the Mishnah says it's mutter, Tanakama says it's asur. So according to him, a rabbi would have told you you're not allowed to. So even though I'm not allowed to, so I say, look, these avocados, I'm probably not going to get to them on Yom Tov, because if I went to the rabbi and asked him if I'm allowed to open up the wall to get to them, and he said no. So that should have made it to me like off limits, right? Out of bounds. And therefore it should have been their classic case of muksa. Rashi's mechadish in the Tanakama, who says if something happens to open up that wall or open up that roof by itself, that you didn't have to actually do it, it happened by itself somehow, then you can actually take the fruit. It's not muksa. So Rashi has to explain, why is that not muksa? It should have been muksa. You can't get to it. Anything you can't get to that's all out of your normal day-to-day, then it should have been muksa. But Rashi's saying no, a special chiddush. That since it's only an isser, let's say, d'Rabbanan to get to that fruit, and it really is not an isser d'Oraisa, so somehow or other, like maybe Shabbatai, you're sort of reaching in that direction, that because it's only an isser d'Rabbanan, somehow or other a person in their mind is thinking, it's not so out of bounds. If I get really, really hungry, it's only an isser d'Rabbanan. Maybe that means he'll do it with a shinui, because maybe to do an isser d'Rabbanan b'shinui makes it not even isser d'Rabbanan. Some people say that if you do a shinui to a d'Oraisa, it brings it down to a Rabbanan. If you do a shinui to a d'Rabbanan, it brings it down to actually mutter. That's why sometimes we do things with a shinui on Shabbos, it becomes mutter. So, in any event, so somehow or other, the Tanakama holds, according to Rashi, that since to access that fruit, I don't have to do any malacha d'oraisa, but there's some kind of isur d'Rabbanan, but that doesn't make me completely dissociate myself from that fruit before Yom Tov begins. Somehow in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I might be able to still get to that fruit somehow or other. So therefore, it's not muksa. And therefore, if it does open up and it is accessible now, I can take the fruit out. It's not muksa. Okay, now Rashi brings another example. You want to try it, Jack? Kida Amar. A little bit farther down. Somewhere around there. Just above there. No, it should be above. Right around there.
Here, Kida Amar, Rabbi,
Tevel. What does that mean?
Regarding Tevel.
Kida Amar means,
As it said above.
as somebody said, not above. No. Why do you think above?
No, about.
Yeah, about, correct. As somebody, he didn't say who, said about Tevel. Now what is Tevel? Everyone knows what Tevel is?
Stuff that they didn't give mice.
Right, didn't take meiser, so therefore it's not fixed up. It's asur to eat, right? It's asur to eat Tevel.
Yeah.
It's actually, I think, a chiyuv misa b'dei shemayim. Okay, so Rashi's saying, but there's something about Tevel that we can compare our case to that case. And where do we encounter that case?
Bishilhi
Mm-hmm.
Parking.
Yeah, Bishili Perkin. So, this is in our Gemora, right? We have a page to attach it to Lamed Dalet Amud Beis. So that would make it a few pages hence. We're on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, and that's on Lamed Dalet Amud Beis. So 3 pages
Further.
into the future, we hope to encounter this that Rashi's now alluding to. Okay, but just to remember that it says Shilhi Pirkin. Shilhi means the end of. Okay? So Rashi's like saying, in his day they didn't have page numbers, right? So Rashi couldn't just say it's on Daf Lamed Daled. Because the word don't know Dapim in Rashi's day. It was art scroll, right? It was all on a manuscript scroll. It wasn't until later with the invention of the printing press that we get these pages of Gemora and the numbers of the pages and so forth. So Rashi never refers to the page. They might be. No, I don't think. No, I don't think that. Shkia now is like 5:20, almost 5:25. It should be after. It should be after 5. It should be for sure after 5. Anyhow, so I'm just telling you that Rashi will almost always refer to. You'll find something in a certain parak, and he'll sometimes allude to the beginning of the parak or the end of the parak, just to make it easier if you want to look it up. But Rashi's not quoting the page, and you say, well, look, it says the page number right there. Yeah, someone later inserted that. But Rashi wanted you to know, so he said, you know where you find this that I'm now alluding to about Tevel, whatever he's going to say about Tevel, that the Gemora says later, you'll find it at the end of our parak. Shilhi at the end of Pirkin. Pirkin means our parak. So we're down with the 4th parak of Beitsa, called Movavi. And at the end of this parak, there'll be something along the lines of what Rashi's alluding to, the thing about Tevel. Okay, now what does it say there about Tevel? Shehu Muchan. Right? Muchan is the opposite of Muksa.
That's ready for use.
That's right. In other words, it's usable. Yeah.
Etzel Shabbat.
Etzel Shabbos. Concerning Shabbos, right? In other words, I have Tevel, food that's never been gemeisered, or right, and never taken trum or meiser from it, so it's called Tevel.
Yeah.
So I can't eat it. So it should be
Awesome.
it should be muksa, right? But Rashi says, the Gemora says later that it's not muksa. Why is it not muksa? I can't eat it, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole definition of muksa, something that's not usable.
Okay.
Should have been grade A muksa.
Right.
Rashi's bringing this as a proof that what? That if you have something that in order to fix it up and make it accessible, as it were, you only have to do an Isser de Rabbanan, then it's still not muksa necessarily. If it takes a malacha d'oraisa to get to that thing, then it's really off limits, and it's for sure muksa. Rashi's trying to explain now that if it's only nisr d'Rabbanan to get to that, then it's not going to be muksa. That's not going to be enough to make it muksa, even though it's like, oh, I can't really, none of us would do that, but it's still accessible enough to not make it muksa. Why? She'im avar.
She'im avar
Tikno
Bitukan.
mitukan. Because if
Avar is if it went past.
no, it actually here means he transgressed,
Avar.
right? Like an avera.
Yeah,
If a
avar.
person actually went ahead and did an avera, and what
Tikno
he,
Bitukan.
if he tikno, if he
Fixed it.
fixed it up, meaning he took a few grains off and called it trumas or maestris,
Oh, that made it nice.
then it would be mitukan, right?
It'd be fixed up.
Right. So Rashi's saying a yesod here, and Rashi's saying it's not my chiddush, it's later on the Gemora is going to say this, but it's behind what the Tanakh is saying over here. That if something is not usable right now, but the whole reason why it's not usable is because some kind of an Isser D'Rabbanan, that's no reason to call it muksa. because even though you and I would not really want to do transgress an Isser D'Rabbanan, we try to be careful even with those, but in people's minds it's like less of an Aveira, right? So therefore people are more willing to entertain the notion at least, right? They don't push something completely away from themselves just because it takes an Isser D'Rabbanan to get to it. So when at the beginning of Yom Tov, when he's thinking, as it were, what am I going to use this Yom Tov? What am I not going to use this Yom Tov? He wouldn't push this away from himself and say, I'm never going to use this on this Yom Tov because it would take an Isser D'Rabbanan to get to it. Rashi's saying no. If the only way you'll get to it is through an Isser D'Rabbanan, either taking apart the wall, in this case, which is compared to an Isser D'Rabbanan, or taking off Trumas Maestris, which is an Isser D'Rabbanan for sure, then a person doesn't push it away from himself so radically. Therefore, it's still what we call muchan. It's an object which can be used on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Okay, so that Rashi bent over backwards over here to explain the Tanakama, because it does take a lot of explanation to explain why this fruit shouldn't have been considered muksa. Why it's not muksa? Why it's not muksa? At the end of the day, Rashi said because of an old rule, which is brought up later on in the Gemora, that if all it takes to get to that object, or to use that object as an Isser D'Rabbanan, people don't really push it completely out of their minds, right? Now, that was the Tanakama. So the Tanakama said what? You can't take that wall apart to get to the fruit, but if something happens and it just opens up by itself somehow, and you see the fruit there, you are allowed to take the fruit because it's not muksa. Why is it not muksa? Rashi just explained why it's not muksa. But the Rebbe Meir says what? Sruli, what does Rebbe Meir say? What's his chiddush in the Mishnah?
I said before.
What is Rebbe Meir's chiddush in the Mishnah?
Now you take lechachila.
You're actually allowed to lechatchila what? Take
Fruit
apart
a wall.
this wall, whatever, part of the
I would
structure.
say not allowed.
You're actually allowed to open up the wall or open up some part of the structure of this house. And as Rashi said, it's a special kind of a house where there's no Isser D'Rabbanan. There's no Isser D'Oraisa, but there is an Isser D'Rabbanan. So for some reason, Rebbe Meir says you're allowed to actually open up and access that fruit. Why? Rashi says, last Rashi in the Mishnah, as what?
Like we explained the reason of the Gemora.
Right. So that's Rashi saying what? Cool it.
Yeah.
Right? It will be explained in the Gemora. I'm not going to tell you the reason. Right? Sometimes Rashi does tell you the reason sort of prematurely before the Gemora gets to it. Sometimes he says, I'm not going to get into it because I want the Gemora to open it up for you. Right? Because sometimes the way the Gemora approaches the subject is better not to know it in advance. Okay?
Yep.
So we're still not sure why Rebbe Meir doesn't have a problem letting you open up the wall of this house. Although Rashi gave us a bit of an understanding when he told us it's not an Isser D'Oraisa, it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan. Perhaps that's a bit of an understanding that will help us later on. Okay, shall we start the Gemora?
You said that Rabbi Meir doesn't want you to open up the...
No, I didn't say that. The Tanakama doesn't let you.
Tanakama. No, sorry, you said Rabbi Meir. Sorry.
We can review the tape.
The evidence. Around hold the case. Sorry, I might have heard wrong.
That's unlikely.
Oh, it's selective deafness.
Want me to open it for you?
Shabbos.
It's only Isser D'Rabbanan.
That's what I was thinking.
Just trying to demonstrate the mission to
Yeah,
us.
see?
He opened it up and
Get a big wind comes along.
I was getting the fruit inside.
The wind ain't not gonna blow us off.
Hillel's like Rebbe Meir, you're allowed to do it with HaYeshiva. As long as there's delicious rugelach inside.
You're tired, do you want a coffee?
Yeah.
There's supposedly some coffee in there, if you just press the button there.
Like regular coffees.
Oh. So you have to make it. I didn't say, would you like me to make it? I said, would you like some?
Yeah.
I'll do.
Yeah. It's Mr. Rabbanan for Shabbat time to make it for you.
What did you say, Jim? Is Easter coffee there?
It's like in the top, I think, and if you press a button, then it comes down into the regular thing. It's like waiting there to be used.
Nice.
I think I'm actually going to
I think.
I'm up there for coffee, but waste.
Getting there.
You're getting there.
Well, okay.
Where are we going? That's the question.
All right. So, are we ready for the Mishnah?
I'm just going to get a cup upstairs.
Leave the door open, please.
Sure.
Okay.
Emma.
A few minutes. Amai.
Why or what?
Why?
Why?
Right. Now, why is probably saying why to the Tanakhama's Chiddush or to the Rabbi Meir's Chiddush, right? Each one is saying a Chiddush.
Looks like
The
Rabbi
Tanakhama
Meir.
is saying a Chiddush in Hilchas Muksa. Rabbi Meir is saying a Chiddush in Hilchas Binyan V'Sira.
Looks like Rabbi Meir.
You think it's in Rabbi Meir?
This is
Oh, right. Okay. So apparently we're skipping over the Tanakhama. Everything that Rashi said to explain the Tanakhama must be so simple to the Gemora that it doesn't need to explain it. I think it was a pretty complicated Rashi, but apparently Rashi's logic, the Gemora feels is simple, doesn't have to explain. So thank God Rashi explained it to us. But here we see again, Rashi explains what he did, what the Gemora didn't. When he left for the Gemora to explain, Rabbi Meir. So the Gemora says, how could Rabbi Meir let you take apart this house to get to the fruit? But behold.
Oh, Kai Sater.
Ahala.
Oh, that's like demolishing a tent.
Not like, where do you get the like?
Kai, step.
In fact,
it's destroying.
he destroys
Destroy the house.
the house. He's destroying the structure, right? So he's taking apart a house. How can Rabbi Meir let him do that? So Rashi already said what the Gemara is hopefully going to say here. Go ahead.
Okay.
Close the door.
No, I'd like it open so that Jack can hear when they start.
Amar Nafshi.
Nechumi.
Nechumi Ba'ada. Amar Shmo.
Here we go. Rashi, what Rashi already told us.
Be
Avira.
Weather.
So the base of be, it means what? We're talking in a case.
In the case
As Rashi said, we're making a kimta, a special case. A special case of Avira, airspace, delivery of the bricks. Right? So there's airspace between the bricks, I think you said. Let's see, Rashi will hopefully explain it now better than he did in the Mishnah. He just alluded to it in the Mishnah, but here he actually explains what is this Avir Delivni. Rashi says in the, you want to try it, Jack? First Rashi in the Gemora, Avir Delivni.
Avir Delivni. Sidur, Shel, Adim, Shelo, Tit.
Right.
In other words, bricks without cement.
Sidur's arrangement, right? Arrangement of the bricks. All the bricks are orderly laid out, but below teat, without any cement, without any teat can be cement. It can also be mud. And with that, we send you off to Mincha. You'll be one of the Avir Delivni in the Minyan. Hopefully we'll will still be here when you get back.
Okay.
You want to sit her?
I think we got one here.
On the shelf there, there's a bunch of
it's
them.
here, it's here.
Oh, you have it?
Not just that, it's a Hillel's
Oh,
HaYeshiva.
good. There you go. What could be better than that?
Luckily, we got Rosh it.
All right. So that explains, according to Rashi and the Mishnah, why it's not an Avera D'Oraisa. It still doesn't quite explain why Rabbi Meir lets you do it l'chachila. Because one would have thought that it's still Asur D'Rabbanan. Certainly the Tanna Kama thinks so. So if our real question was, how can Rabbi Meir let you do it? If the question was, how can he let you do it? It's an Avera D'Oraisa. And we say, no, it's Avera D'Lev, it's only an Avera D'Rabbanan. But still, doesn't quite explain how Rabbi Meir can let you do it. It's an Avera D'Rabbanan. At the end of the day, it should be, or maybe he holds it's not. Maybe the Tanna Kama holds that once they're arranged that way without cement, then it's still an Isser D'Rabbanan to take them apart. Maybe Rabbi Meir holds,
It's not even there.
maybe it's not even an Avera D'Rabbanan. They're just arranged. It's like this book. Can I take this book off this table on Shabbos? So let me take the brick off. I mean, it's not a permanent. It's not a permanent structure. That's for sure. It's a structure, but not a permanent structure. So maybe Rabbi Meir holds it's not even an Isser D'Rabbanan.
Ini. Does ini mean, is that a fact? Is that so?
That's right.
Okay, question. Is that
Really,
right?
the word "in" means yes, right? In Aramaic, "in" means yes. Like people say "inachinami." Inachinami means yes. So too.
It's a question. Yes?
Yeah. So that sometimes it is a question, but here it's a question. Ini, yes, is that so?
Amar Rav Nachman Hanei Levni
The Aitur.
So Rav Nachman, and that these bricks which are left over,
Right.
Yatur, me, Benanim,
Why does
From-
it need to be bricks?
from bricks, Shirei,
No. Binyana.
from a building.
From a building, right? In other words, they were built. You often have that. You have a construction site, right? And they're building, but then they finish the building. There's still a bunch of bricks still set up over there, ready to be built into but they're not. They're just a stack of bricks.
Sherry Latil Tol
Till Talinhu.
it's permitted to pick them up
To
on
move them.
Shabbos.
Mhm.
On Shabbos.
Right.
Or else, since the Chazi, the Mozak,
Mizgah.
the Mizga,
To lie down.
Alahu, on them.
Right. We had this term once before. We talked about the skin. Remember we talked about the skins